It is November, which is pretty wild to believe. This semester has flown by. If this is your first night at Overflow, welcome. I am so glad that you are here tonight. My name is Carson, and yes, in case you're curious, I'm wearing a Birds Aren't Real hoodie. If you can't read that from where you are, great movement that's alive in our world today. In honor of my friend Luke Stillwell. Tonight we are talking about the subject of generosity. And it's something that I think that we've all got to press into, especially if you would consider yourself a Jesus follower. I would say tonight that if you're not a Jesus follower, if you're kind of on the fence of faith, if you're kind of wondering what you believe and you're not really sure about everything that we just sang and talked about, I'm especially glad that you are here. I have a little bit of good news for you. A lot of the things that I'm talking about tonight directly pertain to the Jesus followers in the room. I would say that you're not off the hook because I believe that following Jesus will make your life a lot better and will change the trajectory of the way that you think. But no pressure on making that decision. I hope, though, that tonight encourages you as to talking about the way that Jesus followers should conduct themselves in our world that is so incredibly full of need. I think when I think about the subject of generosity, I go back to the very first day that I ever walked into our church. I was sitting kind of somewhere right there where you are, Paige. I was with some friends of mine that brought me to the church for the first time. They thought that it was a cult, and some of you probably think the same. I promise you we're not. But I remember sitting there and we were getting ready for the gathering. I was looking around the room. I really wasn't sure about what was happening. And I looked down at my friend's dad, and his name is Ben, who has been like a dad to me in every way. He got out his checkbook, which no one in this room has a checkbook, I hope. But he got out his checkbook and he starts writing a check to the church. And I was just kind of intrigued, so I was being pretty nosy. I was like, how much you giving, you know? Like, what am I? And he's a dentist. Do the math. So I remember thinking in that moment, I was like, oh, wow, this guy is, really, really generous. And I started talking to him about it, and he looked at me and his three sons, and he said, boys, wherever you go in life, whatever you do in this life, always, always, always be generous. Because money and status and fame and possessions, those things will captivate your heart, but they will never fulfill it. Money might captivate. Money might seem like it's a good thing to have, and of course it's a good thing to have. I like making money. I want to have money for my family. I want to do things with my family. But if that becomes the source of fulfillment for my heart, I've got to understand and come to terms with the fact that it does not have the power to fulfill my heart. And when it comes to subjects like generosity in the context of the church, I think that there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about conversations like this. I'll tell you before we go any further, tonight is not a ploy to try to get you to give to our church or to give a tithe to our church. That is not what tonight is about. Tonight is about us beginning to be people that say we are made to live generous lives. You as a Jesus follower, you have been instructed and asked to be generous in your life. And in fact, when you look throughout the scripture, when you look throughout the Bible, you will find that wealth is not always aligned with status or money. Wealth is often talked about in the way of being rich. It's being talked about in the way of being generous and being very, very connected to God and living in the way of the Lord. Which is why the title of the message tonight is this. We put it on the screen. It's Becoming Rich. Life is best when given away. Because here's what we know, is fullness is truly found by being faithful. If you want to feel complete, if you want to feel whole in your life, I would submit to you that being faithful to Jesus is the only means to true fullness in this life. A couple weeks ago, we were talking about mental health. We talked about the idea of wholeness and the importance of that and the things that kind of make up being whole in your mind and your body and your soul. And I think that as we think about what does it look like for us to be people who live full lives, to live like really, really centered lives on what matters most and what has the ability to fulfill our heart and our life, I think about it this way. Especially in college, I remember this. I felt like I was on this like really, really intense pursuit to make a lot of money. Because I felt like when I got out of college and I finally got the degree to hang on the wall, I could begin my kind of pursuit of beginning to build my quote unquote little empire. And then as I began to study the life of Jesus, I got a little bit disappointed with everything that I read because Jesus talks far, far more about giving than he does taking. And I think about this in this way. Lennon, my 4.5-month-old daughter, doesn't go anywhere without a lot of stuff. Like, it's crazy to me how a 12-pound human being can have way more stuff than I could ever imagine taking on a week-long trip. And she's just going to proverbial daycare for the day. But when we get home a lot of times at night, I've found this very, very consistently, that Maddie and I will get out of the car and I'll go, okay, Maddie, in order for me to serve you, in order for me to be the best husband of all time, I'm gonna make it a competition to try to get absolutely everything that Lennon has into the house. So I start kind of going around the car, I get her car seat out, and I put that around my arm, and then I'm like, oh, she's got, her diaper bag, and then she's got her lunch box. This is what we call her lunch box. This carries all of her milk. And then she's got this like little bouncy seat thingy that she likes when she goes different places. She's told us, yes, she's 4.5 months. So then, like, I'm walking in the house, and she's in the car seat. Right? But I'm like, sorry, I'll be with you in a minute. But then I'm like, oh, we got to get the stroller because like that's important too. And all of a sudden, I'm standing at the back of my car holding all of this stuff. And Maddie has nothing in her hands. And then there's something inside of me that's like, hey, you gonna help? But then there's another part of me that I'm like, I took all the opportunity away because I made it a race to try to get everything out of the car and into the house as quickly as humanly possible. And the thing that I was thinking about the other day as I was taking all of this stuff into the house is this idea that I've been living my life kind of under the umbrella of is what we hold on to controls us. Another way to say it is what we hold controls. I'm only able to do a limited amount of things when I'm holding on to all of this stuff, right? I'm also, by the way, robbing Maddie of the opportunity to help her daughter and to help me get the stuff into the house. Do you see the picture when it comes to our wealth? When it comes to our assets or the things that we aspire to have, it's like, man, I want to have that great job and I want to have that really, really big house and I want to have a really big family and I want to have all these different things that aren't bad. But we begin to hold on to them as our source of life. And all of a sudden, faithfulness to God doesn't become the means to which we find fullness. All the things that we have that we're trying to hold on to with a death grip become the means that we're trying to feel full and we're trying to feel complete. And I think that as we continue to process, like, what are the things that we're holding on to? Yeah, I gotta settle this back up. The things that we're holding on to, it matters because especially if you would consider yourself a Jesus follower, what you hold on to for your identity and for your success and your joy and your confidence in life, it matters. Because I don't want you to wake up when you're 30 or 40 years old and look back and go, I made my life about all the things that just don't matter. I've met so many people in their 30s and their 40s and some in their 60s that say, Carson, the first section of my life, I grabbed onto everything. I made as much money as I possibly could. I made my life about status. I made my life about all these things, and I regret it because I missed out on time with my family. I missed out on growing my faith. I missed out on serving in the church. I missed out on leveraging who I am for the good of God's kingdom, and I cannot take it back. I can't change it. Now, this is Lennon's car seat, and she's got to go home, and I'm going to give this back to Dylan because she's got a bedtime, everybody. Give it up for John. Come on. But do you see the point? All the things that we grab onto in life and we begin to hold on to with a death grip, we must be really, really intentional with what gets to sit at our table in this way. Now, Jesus talked about it, made it really, really clear. Paul talked about it, made it really, really clear. And we're going to focus in on those two specifically tonight. But I typically don't do this. I typically kind of span out the big ideas throughout the message, but tonight I'm just gonna give them to you up front because I just want you to see and to hear the rest of the message tonight through these three big things. And the first one is this, is that greed is a strategy of the enemy. Hear me really, really clearly. Your kind of pursuit and your the way that you feel when you feel like you are being greedy, that is a strategy of the enemy that we'll talk about more in just a minute. Generosity is a matter of the heart. That's really, really important. It's not about guilt. It's not about shame. It's about the condition of your heart. And then thirdly, God's will for your life. It has far more to do with your courage than it does your comfort. Now, if you're in here and you're like, I'm on the fence about following Jesus, and someone told me that if I follow Jesus, I'll just feel comfortable in life and I'll just feel good and at peace in your life. I promise you, if you were to find another person in the room tonight that's a Jesus follower, they would tell you that their life isn't always comfortable, but God is always asking of something from them for them. Does that make sense? God is asking something from you for the sake of you. And I think that that is really, really important when we begin to think about what does it look like to live a truly, truly generous life. So, jumping from there, Luke chapter 12 is where we are going to be tonight. If you've got your Bible with you, I would invite you to turn there. By the way, if you don't have a Bible, we would love nothing more than to give you a Bible. I believe so deeply in the text of Scripture and of the stories and accounts of the Old Testament and the stories and accounts of Jesus' life in the New Testament. We actually wrote a journal that will kind of step you through how to begin reading the Bible. If you've not read the Bible before, we're actually going to start handing those out next week. They're going to be free, just like the first 40 journals. So make sure you grab one of those if that is something that you are working on. But Luke chapter 12, verse 13 is where we will kind of jump into the story. Luke, I love the way that he starts his account because he talks about how he carefully investigated the life of Jesus. And I think that that's really significant because as we are trying to take our faith seriously, and as we're trying to take a step towards what does God want me to do in my life, as we're trying to be fed spiritually, I think it's really, really beautiful to think about the fact that Luke investigated the life of Jesus in hopes that one day, perhaps you and I would read his account and see the words and the activity of Jesus and be changed by it. Luke chapter 12, verse 13 says this, someone in the crowd said to him, said to Jesus, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And Jesus replied, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Then he said to them, watch out and be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Watch out and be on your guard against all kinds of greed, because life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And I think that this is so critical for us to apply, because when you think about the word consist in the NIV version, the New International Version of the Bible, that word is so interesting to me, because when you begin to kind of look back where that word kind of comes from, because it doesn't feel like it quite fits in the sentence. By the way, as you're reading the Bible, as you're studying the Bible kind of on your own time, anything that you don't understand, don't be intimidated or disappointed by it, just circle it. And then look into it, Google it, search it. Like go to BibleProject.com, they have phenomenal stuff, get a study Bible, come talk to me about it. I would love to learn with you. But when you look into that word, it kind of points to an idea of a cooking term, of when you're bringing a bunch of different ingredients together to make something really, really good for your soul and for your body. Jesus is saying that if you want life, if you want fullness, if you want wholeness in your life, the sole pursuit of possessions and of money and all these different things that we can grab onto and hold onto throughout the course of our life is not and will never be the means to which you live a full and complete life. And I think that this is really, really important because it helps us begin to see what the enemy's strategy is. Because the enemy uses greed to distract us from what is available Every single time. If the enemy can't defeat you, and if you're a Jesus follower, there is so many scriptural references that would support the idea that Jesus has won victory. The war for your life is over. It's complete. Jesus said it is finished, meaning it is done. I have handled it all. One-way covenant, new covenant directly to you. So if the enemy can't defeat you, the enemy is left with the only option to distract you. And the enemy uses what you don't have or what you have greed for to distract you from what is most available to you. And I would submit the thing that's most available to you is God's faithfulness in the moment. Every time I relinquish something, every time I surrender something, I experience a new level of God's faithfulness. Every single time. The other day, this is a super random story, I didn't plan on telling it. I pulled into McDonald's early one morning because I was going to get hash browns for my wife. And I got some too. I pulled in the back and I accidentally cut this dude off. He was coming around one side of the building. I wasn't paying attention and I pulled right in front of him. I stopped and waved him on and he was like, no. And I was like, no, I insist. I'm a jerk. I get it. People think that I'm from the north. Oh, yikes. I'm like, oh, no, dude, you gotta go. And he's like, no, I'm good. So we had this standoff and I was like, finally, I went, I got to the register or the thing and I ordered and I was like, man, maybe I should just buy this guy's breakfast because I feel a little bit guilty. But I want to make his day. He's got a really cool surfboard on his car. He's probably a cool guy. And the more I started thinking about it, as I handed my credit card to the lady and said, hey, will you buy the guy's breakfast behind me? I had something inside of me that's like, no. You're on a budget. You don't have enough money. You're gonna run out. As if $7.46 is going to cause me to run out of money. But there's something, it might, Jonathan said. I do have a 4.5-month-old and the hospital wants money. But the point stands. In that moment, I believe that the enemy wins when I say, no, I can't be generous today because I have a mindset of scarcity. I can't be generous today because I might run out. Because what we're saying in that statement is I can't be generous because I'm not sure whether or not God is going to provide. Now, I totally understand if your checking account literally reads $10.76, $7 is a big portion of the $10. So don't make this just about the dollar. Make this about generosity being the matter of your heart. What's happening? What's controlling? What are you holding on to? Because I think as we continue to dig into the rest of the story, Jesus continues another layer, and he says, and he told them this parable, Luke said, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years, and take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Then Jesus says this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. But is not rich towards God. What does being rich towards God really, really mean? And I think as we study the life of Jesus and we study the way that he talked about and we just look at the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, there's so many things that Jesus took that we thought that we had it correct, meaning humans in that time thought that they had the religious way or the right way, perfectly buttoned up in their own theology box. Jesus took so many things and he just flipped it upside down. Because I remember when I was younger, I was like, well, man, if I can just get wealthy, if I can just get rich, then all of a sudden I'll become generous because I'll have, did y'all see the lottery the other day? It's up to $1 billion. It's like, man, you have a list. If you won the lottery, what would you do with $1 billion? Which I guess you only get 400 something million of it. But what would you do? It's everybody's kind of mentality. But the question Jesus is asking is don't wait. Don't just store up all these things for yourself. That's the key to a shallow life. Though if you're gonna follow me, if you're gonna live in my kingdom, a new view, a new perspective of what wealth actually is available. And I would say it this way: if in God's kingdom, wealth is measured by the depth of our faith, not our possessions, our status, or our money. Jesus is saying, no, you actually attain wealth by being rich towards God, by being deep in your relationship with God, by being consistent in your prayer life, by being dedicated to being generous to other people. He talks about this, about clothing naked people and visiting people in prisons and caring for widows and caring for the hurting people. And then he says that he compares that's a way that we love God, by caring for those people in Matthew's account of his life. This is so significant for us to understand, especially when you're 18 to 25. Because right now, whether you realize it or not, you're building the foundation of your life. Little idea, little piece of theology, little bit of truth at a time. And what I want for you is something better than living a life in pursuit of building bigger buildings to store all your stuff, as the rich young ruler did. And that challenge that Jesus gave to him is so critically important for us to understand. I love the way that Jesus said that this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. So what do we do about giving? Do we give? How do we give? Why do we give? All of those things kind of boil to the surface, especially in the context of church. And I know from a lot of conversations with a lot of friends of mine that have this view that every time the church talks about money, it's like this guilt and shame to give money to the church. But I don't think that you find that in here, because God-ordained giving is a function of faith, not guilt. The most generous people have the deepest faith, because and I'll say that a little bit differently just to clarify. The most generous people that are following Jesus and are giving for the right reasons have a very, very deep faith, because they are not trying to build up the storehouse for all of their stuff. They're saying, I live for the Lord. I follow Jesus. And our God is a giver. I don't know if that kind of sticks out as an idea that you need to take hold of. I know it is for me. For God so loved that he gave. It was a gift. God has always been giving since the very beginning of creation. He wants you to have good things. He wants you to have a life and life to the full. But he knows that faithfulness leads to fullness. And the way that I would just kind of remember this and to know this is, if you want to bring heaven to earth, if you want to bring God's kingdom to the world around you, if you want to bring Jesus' way to UNCW, to Cape Fear, to Brunswick Community College, to your job, to your family, to your friends, you have got to begin to adopt an eternal perspective to your present day living. Does that make sense? So you've got to take the perspective of heaven, the perspective of God, the long game, the faithful game. God is going to bring this to his desired end in the end, and victory is inevitable for me. So I'm taking the perspective of heaven and I'm bringing it to my present day life, and I'm trusting that as I seek to live a generous life, that the Lord is going to provide for me. Because generosity truly is the means that we get to experience a large portion of God's faithfulness. Because if we're saying, God, we got it, we're just gonna go on our own way, we're gonna go on our own path, like we're good, but then we're like, God, we want you to do something new in our life. I hear this all the time in conversations with my friends. I'm just waiting for something new in my life. I want God to do this or God to do that. And the thing that I've began to ask as I've learned about it in my own life is, what have you recently let go of? Where have you practiced faith in releasing control over the things that you have in your life? Because wealth in God's kingdom isn't about stuff, it's about depth. And depth and dependence go hand in hand. The more you are dependent on God, which, by the way, is so unbelievably countercultural in our world today, to be dependent. We are kind of preached to by our culture to go out on our own and to live our separate, segregated lives. But the way of Jesus says, no, do it together. If you take your Bible and you jump into 2 Corinthians chapter 5, I love this section because Paul is just bringing to the church of Corinth a couple different perspectives and then kind of hammers home a very, very famous line that I think that we could read and kind of breeze past very quickly, which I don't want us to do. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 5, he says, now the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. And I love this because in the Message translation of the Bible, it's translated like this: the Spirit of God whets our appetite by giving us a taste of what's ahead. He puts a little bit of heaven in our hearts so that we will never settle for less. I love that imagery. Paul goes on and says, therefore, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body here on earth, we are away from the Lord. For we live by faith, not by sight. And I think this is so significant because when it comes to generosity, it's going to require something of you. If you are going to live a full and free and generous life in the way of Jesus, it's going to require you to walk by faith, not by sight. Because the world says you only act on what you see, and you only act on what other people view as success or successful, which means you just grab on to a little bit of everything. But the invitation of Jesus, the invitation of Paul, the invitation of the Lord is to say, no. You walk by faith, that there's a bigger thing happening right now that's only viewable from heaven. That's the perspective of heaven is the only way you're going to find and arrive at the life that God has for you. Because God is a good Father. And God has a good plan for you. We talked about this last week. If God has a good purpose, then we can rest assured that we have a purpose and it is good. But it requires us to say, I'm not just taking a step by what I see. I'm taking a step by who I know. And I think that is the catalyst to begin to live a generous life. Because every time you choose generosity, you are choosing to walk by faith and not by sight. And every time that you take that step, I firmly believe, not because I've read this, but because I have lived this. Every time I take a step of generosity, my faith grows. And every time I take a step of generosity, my pride gets crumbled and my humility rises. And I remember that if I want to experience God's faithfulness, I've got to practice the art of release. I have to practice the art of surrender very, very consistently. So in 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul pulls all of this together in a really, really beautiful way. In his letter to Timothy, he's kind of wrapping up the first letter that he was writing to him. And in his kind of final charge to Timothy, he says this in verse 17. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant and not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. He just kind of throws that in there. But to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And I love this picture that people who feel like they've got it all together, and maybe that's you. Maybe you got your career path planned out and you know how you're going to make a lot of money one day, and you got it all perfectly planned out. And Paul's looking at you through his letter to Timothy and saying, don't put your hope in that. It's uncertain. It's unstable ground. The question I have for you is truly, just answer this in your own heart. Promise me you'll do it sometime this week. And if you tuned out of the message, come back to me for just a minute. What is your hope in? Really, what is your hope in? Is it in your ability to achieve something? Is it in your ability to get the degree and to make mom and dad proud? Is that where your hope lies? Is your hope in forming a really, really big career one day and making a lot of money and having your perfect house and your 2.5 kids and all the different things. Those things aren't bad. In fact, I would say some of those things are really, really beautiful, especially when done well. But Paul's saying, no. There's something bigger at stake. There's something more important. And I think a lot of you, if you're anything like me, you're like waiting on God to bless you. You're waiting on God to show up and to deliver that perfect thing that fits into that perfect box that is empty in your life. The question that I'm your friend and I love you and I'm for you and I just gently and humbly slide it across the table to you. What if it's gonna require you to let go of some other things? Are you willing? Are you willing to let go of something to pick up the new thing that God has for you? Because I don't like letting go of anything. I'm just like, give me a little bit more, and give me a little bit more, and give me a little bit more. And all of a sudden, my idea of wealth and rich is my own perspective and the world's perspective, not the kingdom perspective of what it looks like to have a deep faith and find true wealth. He goes on in verse 18, and he says this, he says, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. And in this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. If you have your Bible, I would invite you to circle the word command all throughout there and come back to it. And remember that Paul knew something. Paul was on to something. Paul was saying to Timothy, you've got to get your people in line. You've got to get them aimed in the right direction because there's so much at stake, because they are looking for fullness. They are looking for happiness. They are looking for joy in all of the wrong places. And it's evident by his instruction by saying, be rich in good deeds and be generous and willing to share. Why else would he have said that if it wasn't a tension? If it wasn't a problem for you and for me? I think we've got to understand that we truly, truly, truly experience God's faithfulness and build God's kingdom. When we do those things, we become truly rich. When we really dedicate our life to living in the way of being really trusting and putting our full faith and hope and the weight of our life in the Lord, and we dedicate the activity of our life to building God's kingdom, that's when we become rich. And it's so countercultural. And here's why. Because it requires you and me to choose courage over comfort. It requires you to say, I'm gonna do something that feels uncomfortable and release my pursuit of comfort. I've kind of been in your face a little bit tonight about the hope thing. I'm gonna come for you one more time because I love you. Where is the desire and the pursuit of comfort calling the shots in your life? Because remember the very beginning of the night, God's will for your life has far, far, far more to do with you choosing courage than it does finding comfort. But the minute that we feel uncomfortable, we're like, oh, there's no way that God's in this. The minute that we feel uncertain, oh, God's not gonna show up, or I'm not sure about what my next step is, so I'm giving up, God. Like I'm going to do my own thing. I'm taking control back because I see something that you don't see. But remember the words of Paul. We are not in a kingdom that has the values of God's kingdom in the way that we live in the world today, which requires us to become really, really consistent in our pursuit of choosing courage over comfort. If you're gonna live a generous life, I would argue, if you're gonna live a life in the way of Jesus, you're going to do the majority of the things in your life scared. You're gonna do the majority of the things in your life without certainty that they will work out. You're gonna have some setbacks along the way. You're not gonna know what to do. You're not gonna know if God's gonna show up. But remember back from the very beginning, Daniel chapter 6. Daniel went into the lion's den, knowing and trusting and believing that God was going to provide for him no matter the outcome. And his faith was so strong that the pagan king believed it too. What if that was us? What if our faith was so deep and so focused on simply following Jesus and to not just pursuing comfort and to taking our hope and putting it safe and secure in the hands of our God? What would be different? To pull all this together, I would say it this way. What if we let our courage, motivated by our love, be our witness? Like what if our courage, motivated by our love, was our witness to what we say that we believe and the way that we made a difference in the world around us? What would be different for the kingdom of God? It might cost you some things. I know it's costing me things. But I'm trying with every day, and I don't nail it every time, and I'm far from perfect. But I want to live a life that is rich in the way of God, not in the way of the world. Because there's an eternal perspective. There's an eternal destination for all of us to take that perspective and bring it to our everyday life. I'd invite you to stand where you are. This becomes incredibly challenging when it comes to, okay, what's next? What do I do? Do I just start handing things out? Do I just go empty every bit of what I've got? No, you don't. You make the decision that you're gonna build your life on the foundation of God and God alone. Because he is the only true, and he is the only good, and he is the only trustworthy foundation that you will ever find in this life. And we are a generation of 18 to 25-year-olds. We have the opportunity to say we are going to lead the way in the world, not by focusing on the numbers that we give, but the condition of our heart and our alignment of our existence with our good and faithful and trustworthy God. Amen? We have an opportunity that sits in front of us to find fullness through freedom, and through faith, through focus, and through dedication to the Lord and to the way of Jesus. So where does that begin? Where is that starting line? It's right here in front of you. With the next few minutes, singing this declaration that I will build my life despite the darkness, despite the uncertainty, despite the tension of scarcity, despite what I'm afraid of, despite what that person said, despite that rhythm of life that I'm pursuing, despite those other dreams that might not be in alignment with God, I'm saying I'm building my life on the foundation of God, because that is the only foundation that is strong enough for me to build my life on. It's the only foundation strong enough for us to be people of faith and following the Lord in every step. So let's just sing this with our loudest voice. Put your hands in the air and dedicate your life to building it solely on the foundation of Jesus. Let's sing this together.